don't take no stock in mathematics anyway. I don't either. At first I hated the school, but by and by I got so I could stand it. Whenever I got uncommon tired, I played hooky, and the hiding I got next day done me good and cheered me up. So the longer I went to school, the easier it got to be. I was getting sort of used to the widow's ways, too, and they weren't so raspy on me. Living in a house and sleeping in a bed pulled on me pretty tight mostly, but before the cold weather I used to slide out and sleep in the woods sometimes, and so that was a rest to me. I liked the old ways best, but I was getting so I liked the new ones too a little bit. The widow said I was coming along slow but sure and doing very satisfactory. She said she weren't ashamed of me. One morning I happened to turn over the salt cellar at breakfast. I reached for some of it as quick as I could to throw it over my left shoulder and keep off the bad luck, but Miss Watson was in ahead of me and crossed me off. She says, "Take your hands away, Huckleberry. What a mess you're always making." The widow put in a good word for me, but that weren't enough to keep off the bad luck. I knowed that well enough. I started out after breakfast feeling worried and shaky and wondering what was going to fall on me and what it was going to be. There's ways to keep off some kinds of bad luck, but this weren't one of them kind. So I never tried to do anything but just poked along low-spirited and on the watch-out. I went down to the front garden and clumb over the stile where you go through the high board fence. There's an inch of new snow on the ground, and I seen somebody's tracks. They had come up from the quarry and stood around the stile a while and then went on around the garden fence. It was funny they hadn't come in after standing around so. I couldn't make it out. It was very curious somehow. I was going to follow around, but I stooped down to look at the tracks first. I didn't notice anything at first, but next I did. There was a cross in the left boot heel made with big nails to keep off the devil. And it didn't work, considering the person that was wearing them. I was up in a second and shining down the hill. I looked over my shoulder every now and then, but I didn't see nobody. I was at Judge Thatcher's as quick as I could get there. He said, "Why, my boy, you're all out of breath. Did you come here for your interest?" "No, sir," I says. "Is there some for me?" "Oh, yes, a half-yearly is in last night. Over $150. Quite a fortune for you. You better let me invest it along with your $6,000, because if you take it, you'll spend it." "No, sir," I says. "I don't want to spend it. I don't want it at all, nor the $6,000 neither. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the $6,000 and all." He looked surprised. He couldn't seem to make it out. He says, "Why, what can you mean, my boy?" I says, "Don't you ask me no questions about it, please. You'll take it, won't you?" He says, "Well, I'm puzzled. Is something the matter?" "Please take it," says I, "and don't ask me nothing, then I won't have to tell no lies." He studied a while, and then he says, "Oh, I think I see. You want to sell all your property to me, not give it. That's the correct idea." Then he wrote something on a paper and read it over and says, "There, you see it says for a consideration. That means I bought it of you and paid you for it. Here's $1 for you. Now you sign it." So I signed it and left. Miss Watson's nigger Jim had a hairball as big as your fist, which had been took out of the fourth stomach of an ox, and he used to do magic with it. He said there was a spirit inside of it, and it knowed everything. So I went to him that night and told him Pap was here again before I found his tracks in the snow. What I wanted to know was what was he going to do, and was he going to stay? Jim got out his hairball and said something to it, and then he held it up and dropped it on the floor. It fell pretty solid and only rolled about an inch. Jim tried again, and then another time, and it acted just the same. Jim got down on his knees and put his ear against it and listened, but it warn't no use. He said it wouldn't talk. He said sometimes it wouldn't talk without money. I told him I had an old slick counterfeit quarter that warn't no good because the brass showed through the silver a little, and it wouldn't pass nohow, even if the brass didn't show, because it was so slick it felt greasy, and so that would tell on it every time. I reckon I wouldn't say nothing about the $1 I got from the judge. I said it was pretty bad money, but maybe the hairball would take it because maybe it wouldn't know the difference. Jim smelt it and bit it and rubbed it and said he would manage so the hairball would think it was good. He said he would split open a raw Irish potato and stick the quarter in between and keep it there all night, and next morning you couldn't see no brass and it wouldn't feel greasy no more, and so anybody in town would take it in a minute, let alone a hairball. Well, I knowed a potato would do that before, but I'd forgot it. Jim put the quarter under the hairball and got down and listened again. This time he said the hairball was all right. He said it would tell my whole fortune if I wanted it to. I says, go on. So the hairball talked to Jim, and Jim told it to me. He says, yo old father don't know what he's a-gwine to do. Sometime he spec he'll go away, and then again he spec he'll stay. The best way is to rest easy and let the old man take his own way. They's two angels hovering round about him. One of 'em is white and shiny, and the other one is black. The white one gets him to go all right a little while, then the black one sail in and bust it all up. A body can't tell yet which one gonna fetch him at the last. But you is all right. You gwine to have considerable trouble in your life and considerable joy. Sometimes you gwine to get hurt, and sometimes you gwine to get sick, but every time you's gwine to get well again. There's two gals flying about you in your life. One of 'em's light, and the other one is dark. One's rich, and the other's po'. You's gwine to marry the po' one first and the rich one by and by. You wants to keep away from the water as much as you can and don't run no risk, 'cause it's down in the bills that you's gwine to get hung. When I lit my candle and went up to my room that night, there sat Pap, his own self. So he basically gave Huckleberry Finn a cold reading. That's what we call a cold reading, I guess, for lack of a better term. Generalized statements that anybody could make about anybody. Chapter 5. Pap starts in on a new life. Pap shouldn't have bothered about trying to keep off the devil, because he sure enough didn't do it, according to this book. I had shut the door too. Then I turned round and there he was. I used to be scared of him all the time. He tanned me so much. I reckon I was scared now too, but in a minute I see I was mistaken. That is, after the first jolt, as you may say, when my breath sort of hitched, he being so unexpected. But right away after I see I weren't scared of him worth bothering about. He was most 50 and he looked it. His hair was long and tangled and greasy and hung down, and you could see his eyes shining through like he was behind vines. It was all black, no gray. So was his long mixed-up whiskers. There warn't no color in his face where his face showed. It was white, not like another man's white, but a white to make a body sick, a white to make a body's flesh crawl, a tree-toed white, a fish-belly white. As for his clothes, just rags, that was all. He had one ankle resting on the other knee. The boot on that foot was busted and two of his toes stuck through, and he worked them now and then. His hat was laying on the floor, an old black slouch with the top caved in like a lid. I stood looking at him. He sat there looking at me, with his chair tilted back a little. I set the candle down. I noticed the window was up, so he'd clumb in by the shed. He kept a-looking me all over. By and by, he says, "Starchy clothes, very. You think you're a good deal of a big bug, don't you?" "Maybe I am, maybe I ain't," I says. "Don't you give me none of your lip," he says. "You put on a considerable many frills since I've been away. I take you down a peg before I get done with you. You're educated too, they say, can read and write. You think you're better than your father now, don't you, 'cause he can't? I'll take it out of you. Who told you might meddle with such highfalutin foolishness, hey? Who told you could?" "The widow, she told me." "The widow, hey? And who told the widow she could put in her shovel about a thing that ain't none of her business?" "Nobody never told her." "Well, I'll learn her how to meddle. And looky here, you drop that school, you hear? I'll learn people to bring up a boy to put on airs over his own father and let on to be better than what he is. You let me catch you fooling around that school again, you hear? Your mother couldn't read and she couldn't write neither before she died. None of the family couldn't before they died. I can't. And here you're swelling yourself up like this. I ain't the man to stand it. You hear? Say, let me hear you read." I picked up a book and begun reading something about George Washington and the wars. General Washington and the wars. When I'd read about a half a minute, he fetched the book a whack with his hand and knocked it across the house. He says, "It's so. You can do it. I had my doubts when you told me. Now looky here, you stop that putting on frills. I won't have it. I'll lay for you, my smarty, and if I catch you about that school, I'll tan you good. First you know you'll get religion, too. I never see such a son." He took up a little blue and yellow picture of some cows and a boy and says, "What's this?" "It's something they give me for learning my lessons good." He tore it up and says, "I'll give you something better. I'll give you a cow hide." He sit there mumbling and growling a minute, and then he says, "Ain't you a sweet-scented dandy, though? A bed and bedclothes and a looking-glass and a piece of carpet on the floor, and your own father got to sleep with the hogs in the tanyard. I never see such a son. I bet I'll take some of these sprills out of you before I'm done with you. Why, there ain't no end to your airs. They say you're rich, hey? How's that?" "They lie, that's how. Looky here, mind how you talk to me. I'm a-standing about all I can stand now, so don't give me no sass. I've been in town 2 days and I ain't heard nothing about how you being rich. I heard about it way down at the river, too. That's why I come. You get me that money tomorrow, I want it. I ain't got no money. It's a lie. Judge Thatcher's got it. You get it. I want it." "I ain't got no money, I tell you. You ask Judge Thatcher. He'll tell you the same." "All right, I'll ask him, and I'll make him pungle, too, or I'll know the reason why. How much you got in your pocket? I want it." "I ain't only got $1, and I want that to... It don't make no difference what you want it for. You just shell it out." He took it and bit it to see if it was good, and then he said he was going downtown to get some whiskey. Said he hadn't had a drink all day. When he had got out on the shed, he put his head in again and cussed me for putting on frills and trying to be better than him. And when I reckoned he was gone, he come back and put his head in again and told me to mind about that school because he was going to lay for me and lick me if I didn't drop that. Next day he was drunk, and he went to Judge Thatcher's and bully-ragged him and tried to make him give up the money, but he couldn't, and then he swore he'd make the law force him. The judge and the widow went to law to get the court to take me away from him and let one of them be my guardian. But it was a new judge that had just come, and he didn't know the old man, so he said courts mustn't interfere and separate families if they could help it. Said he'd rather not take a child away from its father, so Judge Thatcher and the widow had to quit on the business. Well, it ain't like that today. Don't you take your child from you at the drop of a hat if you got connections. If somebody's got connections, I should say. Judge Thatcher and the widow had to quit on that. That pleased the old man till he couldn't rest. He said he'd cowhide me till I was black and blue if I didn't raise some money for him. I borrowed $3 from Judge Thatcher, and Pap took it and got drunk, and went a-blowing around and cussing and whooping and carrying on, and he kept it up all over town with a tin pan till most midnight. Then they jailed him, and next day they had him before court and jailed him again for a week. But he said he was satisfied, and said he was the boss of his son, and he'd make it one for him. When he got out, the new judge said he was going to make a man of him. Oh, Lord, the new judge is an idiot. So he took him to his own house and dressed him up clean and nice and had him to breakfast and dinner and supper with the family and was just old pie to him, so to speak. And after supper he talked to him about temperance and such things till the old man cried and said he'd been a fool and fooled away his life, but now he was going to turn over a new leaf and be a man nobody wouldn't be ashamed of. And he hoped the judge would help him and not look down on him. The judge said he could hug him for them words, so he cried. And his wife, she cried again. Pap said he'd been a man that had always been misunderstood before, and the judge said he believed it. The old man said what a man wanted that was down was sympathy. And the judge said it was so. So they cried again. And when it was bedtime, the old man rose up and held out his hand and says, "Look at it, gentlemen and ladies all. Take a hold of it. There's a hand that was the hand of a hog, but it ain't no more. That's the hand of a man that started in on a new life, and he'll die before he'll go back. You mark them words. Don't forget I said 'em. It's a clean hand now. Shake it. Don't be afeared." So they did, and they're carrying on. Lord have mercy. Then the old man, he signed a pledge, made his mark. The judge said it was the holiest time on record or something like that. Then they took the old man into a beautiful room, which was a spare room, and in the night sometime, he got powerful thirsty and clumb out on the porch roof and slid down a stanchion and traded his new coat for a jug of 40 rod and clumb back again and had a good old time, and toward daylight he crawled out again, drunk as a fiddler, and rolled off the porch and broke his left arm in 2 places and was most froze to death when somebody found him after sunup. And when they come to look at that spare room, they had to take soundings before they could navigate it. Soundings is what they used to do to see how deep the bottom was off a boat. They'd have to use some sort of a stick or something to see how shallow water was so that they wouldn't drag bottom. I was taking soundings so they could navigate. I think is what that is. That's the only meaning I've ever heard of. The judge, he felt kind of sore. He said he reckoned the body could reform the old man with a shotgun, maybe, but he didn't know no other way. Because there weren't no other way. Chapter 6. Find out what the title of Chapter 6 is, now that the old man's got drunk on 40 rod, whatever 40 rod is. I don't know what 40 rod is. I'd have to look that up. Our internet is down at the moment. Been down for a couple of days already. Let's see here. Pap struggles with the death angel. Okay, that's when he kidnaps Huckleberry Finn. Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and he went for Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money, and he went for me too for not stopping school. He catched me a couple of times and thrashed me, but I went to school just the same and dodged him or outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I reckon I'd go now to spite Pap. That trial law was a slow business. Appeared like they weren't ever going to get started on it, so every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off the judge for him to keep from getting a cow hiding. Every time he got money, he got drunk. Every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town. Every time he raised Cain, he got jailed. He was just suited. That kind of thing was right in his line. He got to hanging around the widows too much, and she told him at last if he didn't quit using around there, she would make trouble for him. Well, wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck Finn's boss, so he watched out for me one day in the spring and catched me and took me up the river about 3 miles in a skiff and crossed over to the Illinois shore where it was woody and there weren't no houses but an old log hut and a place where the timber was so thick you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me with him all the time, and I never got a chance to run off. We lived in that old cabin, and he always locked the door and put the key under his head at night. He had a gun which he had stole, I reckon. And we fished and hunted, and that was what we lived on. Every little while he locked me in and went to the store 3 miles to the ferry and traded fish and game for whiskey and fetched it home and got drunk and had a good time and licked me. The widow found out where I was by and by, and she sent a man over to try and get a hold of me, but Pap drove him off with a gun, and it wasn't long after that till I was used to being where I was and liked it, all but the cowhide part. It was kind of lazy and jolly laying off comfortable all day, smoking and fishing and no books nor study. 2 months or more run along, and my clothes got to be all rags and dirt. And I didn't see how I'd ever got to like it so well at the widow's, where you had to wash and eat on a plate and comb up and get to bed and get up regular and be forever bothering over a book and have old Miss Watson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I had stopped cussing because the widow didn't like it. But now I took to it again because Pap had no objections. It was pretty good times up in the woods there, take it all around. But by and by, Pap got too handy with his hickory, and I couldn't stand it. I was all over welts. He got to going away so much, too, and locking me in. Once he locked me in and was gone 3 days. It was dreadful lonesome. I judged he got drowned, and I wasn't ever going to get out anymore. I was scared. I made up my mind I'd fix up some way to leave there. I had tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but couldn't find no way. There weren't a window to it big enough for a dog to get through. I couldn't get up the chimney. It was too narrow. The door was thick, solid oak slabs. Pap was pretty careful not to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away. I reckon I'd hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, I was most all the time at it because it's about the only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid up between a rafter and the clapboards of the roof. I greased it up and went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin behind the table to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. I got under the table and raised the blanket and went to work on a section of the big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, but I was getting toward the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I got rid of the signs of my work and dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Pap came in. Pap warn't in a good humor, so he was his natural self. He said he was downtown and everything was going wrong. His lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if they ever got started on the trial. But then there was ways to put it off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed how to do it. And he said people allowed there'd be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian, and they guessed it would win this time. This shook me up considerable because I didn't want to go back to the widow's anymore and be so cramped and civilized, as they called it. And then the old man got to cussing, and cussed everybody and everything he could think of, and then cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any, and after that he polished off with a kind of general cuss all around, including a considerable parcel of people which he didn't know the names of, and so called him what's-his-name when he got to him, and went right along with his cussing. He said he would like to see the would get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come any such game on him, he knowed of a place 6 or 7 miles off to stow me in where they might hunt till they dropped and they couldn't find me. That made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckoned I wouldn't stay on hand till he got that chance. I must report now that it is snowing. I've run all around out in the yard, trying to get a snapshot of it. Oh, Lordy. And, noticed that my left leg was sore at the calf. It's got a tender spot. I didn't notice that until I started running around. That's the foot that I stepped on my nail with, I believe. But that was at Thanksgiving, surely. If anything was going to happen, it happened before now. It's already December the 11th. December the 11th. That was the foot, all right. Just got me worried. Now it's snowing and I haven't had a tetanus shot, and I hope that's not from the nail that I stepped on. If it is, we'll find out. If it starts spreading up my leg, I'll have to go trotting down to the hospital to get a tetanus shot. So, it's only in my calf though, and I looked, I didn't see any red streaks. So I must have just pulled a muscle. Somehow or another, you think I'd know if I pulled a muscle, but, well, I can't ever tell. I don't know. Let's see here. So Huck's figuring on running away here. And his pappy is rip-roaring drunk as usual, and raising hell about the widow, and he's fixing to go off, and he's cussing everybody in sight and out of sight. Let's see. The old man made me go to the skiff and fetch the things he had got. See, if it had been me, I'd have just gone off in the skiff.